for just that, the impact of the coronavirus on the NFL. Adam, I know it's been a busy day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Molly, there's a lot going on in the NFL, even though the NFL has not been proactive so far, even though it's been silent, even though we have not heard any statements. I would imagine we're going to hear the NFL address its upcoming annual owners' meetings in Florida in a couple of weeks. It's hard to imagine that they're going to allow older people in a group setting to travel to Florida here in a couple of weeks. There's been no announcement because really there's no urgency as there is in the NBA right now. But the NBA was out front in this. It obviously made a huge statement. It looks great in doing that. And the NFL so far has been very quiet. But let me tell you what's going on behind the scenes. I think there are teams right now discussing whether or not to shut their training facilities. The Washington Redskins moments ago announced that their coaches and scouts no longer will be allowed to travel to pro days of college prospects. So that's now out the window for the Washington Redskins, and you could be sure that there'll be other teams that follow along. Again, we're waiting to hear from the NFL on the owners' meetings. We're waiting to hear from the NFL on the NFL draft, which it's discussed various options at this point in time. But you can't imagine being in Las Vegas in front of crowds of people, hundreds of thousands of people, as the league has done in previous years with the draft. That's illogical to think about. We are entering a new era here. Now, the other business at hand is the NFL new league year that is scheduled to begin next week on Wednesday at 4 Eastern when teams are allowed to make moves. Now, again, this is not confirmed, but speculative. I'm hearing there is some discussion about potentially moving back the start of the league year. Now, the league has been very firm this week, up until now, that the league year will start Wednesday, 4 o'clock. But as we see all this news trickle in, as we see the NBA move to the forefront at the head of leading the charge here and showing real leadership, it's hard to imagine that the NFL is going to allow business to go on as usual next week with players signing millions of dollars worth of contracts and press conferences and teams' facilities being shut. It just doesn't go together. And so we're waiting to hear something from the NFL, which has been quiet up until now, about how it's going to handle everything in regards to the league year that starts next week and the owners' meetings that are coming up in a couple of weeks.
Adam Schefter, appreciate you, man. Forgive me for going in this direction, but I'm just curious about it, so I must ask you. There's a collective bargaining negotiation that's going on as we speak, and we know the friction that has existed. I'm talking about internally with the Players Association. You got a lot of guys out there that don't agree with the proposal. They don't agree with Executive Director DeMaurice Smith's position. Players at meetings, from what I told Monday, went in on the executive director, really trying to neutralize what he was trying to bring to their attention. There's a lot of dissension within the ranks of the NFLPA. What kind of effect do you believe this virus can potentially have on these CBA negotiations?
Well, I would say this, Stephen A. Who believes or who feels more comfortable economically today than they did 1 or 2 weeks ago? There's nobody that could feel that way. That means the owners, that means the players. That means owners feel probably shaky about the deal. That means players probably have to look at this and say, are we going to get as good a deal when the market right now is tanking and it's hemorrhaging money at this point in time? So a lot of the votes have already been cast. So that's also interesting. I don't know how many ballots are still out there that have not been filled out. But there's still been encouragement for all players to get out and vote, whether you're for the CBA or against the CBA. But it's hard to think. We are living in a different era right now. We have not seen anything like this in our lifetimes. So I don't know if everybody's fully grasping the full scope of this as they factor that into the vote on the collective bargaining agreement, as insignificant as something like that now seems.
Adam, I can't help but to think the NFL lucked out here in a way. From the reputable sources that I've read, predictions, and these are just predictions because a lot is unknown about the coronavirus, are it will get much worse before it gets better. And people are saying 2 to 3 months seems to be the horizon that they're looking. The NFL season doesn't start till September. I mean, they have time to get it together. What, in terms of the timetable, does this actually affect if we're sitting down to regular season games and here's opening day or kickoff?
Right. Well, Max, there was one team I spoke to this morning, right, that was in touch with its medical staff and going over the various scenarios with the doctor. And let me be very clear. Again, the doctors know a lot more than we do. I'm just passing on what was told in that team's training facility. And this doctor said that if teams evacuate and everybody goes home and everybody's quarantined and everybody's on their own for a couple of weeks, and we can figure out how to get the testing done, and we can figure out who has the virus and who doesn't have the virus and what measures we should and shouldn't be taking. This belief of this particular team doctor was that we could help control it as best as we can. But if the proper steps aren't taken in the coming days, that this could obviously be a disaster. And we're already beginning to see hints of that right now. And who knows if we're already too late? None of us know these answers. I'm just passing along what one doctor said. They believe that if, again, the proper steps are taken now, it will go a long way towards helping the situation and not having it be as significant later on. So as that relates to the NFL season, you're right. If our country can get a hold of this and rein it in and keep it manageable, then yes, you would think the NFL season, as down the line as that seems, as insignificant as that seems, might be okay. But again, we are in uncharted waters that we have not been in before, and we do not know how widespread this is going to be.
Adam, appreciate the information and obviously your informed perspective, and I know you'll keep us up to speed, ESPN, the network as a whole, on all things regarding the NFL. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Molly.
Meanwhile, the M's ruled out 15 minutes before tip-off after originally being listed as questionable at 8:14 local. Both teams went to their respective locker rooms. The game was officially postponed at 8:40. Less than an hour later, Utah Jazz center Rudy Gobert was confirmed to have tested positive for the COVID-19 coronavirus. Within minutes, the NBA released an official statement. Now we have breaking news here. The Jazz have confirmed a second player has tested positive. Our Adrian Wojnarowski tweeting this: Jazz star Donovan Mitchell has tested positive for the coronavirus, league sources tell ESPN. Jazz players privately say that Rudy Gobert had been careless in the locker room, touching other players and their belongings. The hotel in Oklahoma City where the Jazz were staying has now been closed to the public. On that note, we bring in NBA reporter Royce Young, who has been covering this. He was at the game last night. Royce, thank you so much for joining us this morning. What's the latest that you're hearing?
So as of right now, as we're standing here, this is the 21C Hotel over here. This is the back alley where the Utah Jazz, we believe their team buses have been waiting. They had 5 buses here. 3 have already left. There's 2 that are kind of tucked back there away from visibility that are just sitting there idling right now. So as you mentioned, the hotel has been closed to the public. All staff employees are walking around with blue rubber gloves on their hands. The phones are ringing off the hooks in there of people wondering what's going to happen with their wedding that was planned at this hotel, because this is a pretty nice Oklahoma City hotel. This is the preferred hotel for NBA teams to stay at. So as of right now, the Utah Jazz are obviously making arrangements on how to get back to Salt Lake City with the separation between the players that have tested positive, which is now we understand to be Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, versus the rest of the team personnel that has not tested positive.
Royce, you've done an excellent job helping us grasp the magnitude of the situation, what it's like to actually be on scene. So thank you so much for that. And please be safe yourself. All right, we'll bring it back to the desk now. Jay Williams here with us. Jay, good to have you.
Good morning.
We haven't heard from you yet here on First Take. What is on your mind at the moment as this continues to develop?
Stephen A. and I were texting yesterday, and we had the conversation. First off, that the NBA, as they were quick to pivot, and I give them a lot of credit for that, I also think they were a little bit slow and dragged their feet at the beginning of it, considering that you had different teams that were acting as individual entities saying what they decided they wanted to do instead of having one uniform decision. Obviously, as this thing continues to scale, I think people start to see the severity of it. I also think it's a little bit frustrating because now that Tom Hanks or Rita Wilson or Rudy Gobert or Donovan Mitchell has it, it's become a very serious issue. I recognize, Max, I hear you often talk about privilege. I think that sometimes we have to put this into perspective because we're talking to people at home, but we're talking about very elite people who have access to get tests like that. So what about the everyday person who doesn't have access to get tested, that maybe jokes around it in a jovial way, the same way Rudy Gobert joked around with it and continues to spread? I think we need to look at it holistically and recognize the severity of it. And people who compare it to the flu, it's not the flu. We have vaccines for the flu. We hopefully can learn how to contain this and get through it. I firmly believe that. But postponing something isn't saying canceling it, shutting down, never happening. But we need to get out of this narrow-minded view and think big picture. May Madness still sounds great to me. It still sounds like madness. Having the NBA playoffs in June, July, August still sounds tremendous to me if we can get through it. But we need to look at it that way. That's my point.
To further that point, why did Rudy Gobert do what he did? Why did he do that to the microphones of the assembled press and then was careless in the locker room reportedly, but Woj is reporting it? Because he's a bad guy? No. Because he felt he had enough of an understanding about it, that the odds were low that he had it, that he could make that joke. Rudy Gobert was not in a position to make that judgment. It was an unsound judgment. Yes, it is the case that it is still